Today, the topic that we're going to be talking about is what do evaluators look for in a proposal? And we have with us Tom Powell, who's a specialist in proposal evaluations. Tom and I have worked together 15 years ago, and we were colleagues, and he's a good friend. And we often banter about what's good and bad in proposals, me from the selling side and Tom from the evaluation side. So 3 things that we will cover in our question and answer discussion. And thank you very much for all the questions that you've sent. Hopefully we'll cover most of them. And if we haven't, we will forward that and answer via email. So 3 things we'll look at is what do proposal evaluators look for in a proposal? What will make my or your proposal stand out over the competition? And the third one, how do I make my proposal easy to evaluate? So Tom, thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy schedule and sharing your experience with us. Welcome.
Thank you very much for your introduction, Sam. And yeah, really pleased to be with everyone this morning. So hopefully we'll have a nice exchange of information and interaction. And yeah, I really appreciate joining your group and being able to share some of my experiences today. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. So before we get started, one question that always I think about is how did you end up in this profession? Did you just wake up one morning and think, proposal evaluation sounds like a great place to be? Oh, Tom, you've gone on mute for some reason.
Hey, Sam.
Hi, Sanjay. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, that wasn't me. Maybe there was a global action to mute, but yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Yeah. So as you asked, yeah, not exactly. I mean, I initially started off my career in business career mainly on the vendor side, actually. So packaging, selling solutions. Writing proposals, bidding for business. So I spent a lot of time in that area, and then I about 12 years ago, actually, around about the time of financial crash, I moved more into helping large clients, purchasing solutions and expressing their requirements, through bidding processes, typically with large companies. So so just something that, for me personally, was a natural evolution to share my expertise more on the client side, more than from the selling vendor side of things. So yes, just one of those career changes that naturally evolved for me personally. So and I'm pleased I'm operating on that side now. So that's the story in short.
Thank you. And I guess the other advantage is not being measured on win rate successes when you're on the other side.
Absolutely, yes. The pressure's a little bit more on the selling side. So yes, that's very true. I don't miss forecast calls and updates of that nature. So yes, absolutely, a key point you make.
That explains why you're looking so chilled out and relaxed. And what were some of the types of proposals and industries you worked with over the years?
Yeah, so I've been based in the Middle East for a number of years. I'm currently in the UK, actually, but I've spent a large chunk of my professional career in the Middle East. So my sort of sector focus has been very much in line with major sectors in that part of the world. So oil and gas, a lot of work in that space, telcos, retail, healthcare, and banking sector, actually. So those sectors I've covered quite extensively. And in terms of solution areas, mainly around application space, around CRM, ERP type solutions, e-commerce. A lot of work around IT infrastructure, related procurements and delivery, and quite a lot in the healthcare solution application space as well. So quite a mixed bag. And one of the advantages of working across sector is that there's certain nuances and differences, but there's also a lack of transfer of knowledge across those domains. So it's been quite useful for me to work, have the privilege of working in different sectors and being able to cross-pollinate my experiences accordingly. So quite a wide range, I would say.
That's great. Thanks, Tom. Now, one question starting off with is, what are some things you've seen in proposals that makes the job of evaluation difficult?
There's quite a range of those actually, and it can also very much depend on the culture of the client environment that's doing the procurement activity. But I mean the main failings I see are around bidders, in very simple terms, just not following the bidding instructions. And as basic as that may sound, if the procuring organization have bothered to put together a list of instructions, typically that'll be for some practical reasons. And if you're not following the instructions, you're automatically making life difficult for the end customer, which is not a good place to be starting when you're in a bid submission scenario. So that's number one. To follow the instructions, even if they may not appear to be optimal or may not appear to be logical from your perspective. Follow the instructions explicitly is always a good idea. The other main issue is simply not answering the exam question correctly. So there's a level of detail required to go into. Sometimes it's not always that detailed, but nonetheless you need to answer the question. And I think a lot of sales organizations don't put their A team on a bid, and there's maybe too much multitasking going on. So there's not that cool, calm approach to looking at an RFP type scenario and then appropriately dissecting what's been asked for and answering everything correctly. And quite often when there's evaluation criteria being published with the bid, which is generally quite typical, though not always the case. You really need to work quite hard to make sure your value proposition is not just articulated in your proposal, but somehow needs to line up against the evaluation criteria. And normally that's on a large bid that can be quite a time-consuming job to do that. But it's absolutely essential to do that in order to make life of the people who are doing the evaluation, make things really straightforward and easy for them to evaluate your bid. So I'd say they're the three sort of key points I would make.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate that. So, as an evaluator, what do you look for in a proposal in addition to what you mentioned?
Yeah, well, as an absolute minimum, are the points I've just made. So, they really are quite basic, but very essential to lay a good foundation. I mean, the other things I look for are, additional value add over and above what's being asked for. And, as a solution provider or somebody, company bidding for work, if you have some experience in that domain, which typically you would, otherwise you typically shouldn't be bidding. You really need to draw out a value proposition over and above the minimum that's being asked for. That's always very well received by a client organization, particularly if you can come up with some novel or innovative way of addressing the objectives. So, I'd make that distinct from changing the objectives in order to fit your solution, which is never a smart idea, but teasing out some additional value add, that could be a faster route to deliver the solution that you're proposing, or some way to make some improvement over and above what they're doing. That's critical because it shows some depth, expertise, indirectly and directly. So that's critical. Previous experience in the solution area and the industry is also a critical thing, because that helps to build a comfort level and give the feeling of a lower risk profile. So that it's very important to state your credentials in that particular solution area and industry space. And aligned with that is the team that would be executing the project or the initiative that was being undertaken. That's also also critical. So those things typically are not explicitly asked for in bid situations, but nonetheless, as a bidder, you need to find a way to articulate your value proposition in that way. And if it's explicitly asked for, then that's easy. If it's not asked for, then you really need to be quite smart to cover that in the executive summary, for example, or any additional information that you can supply. So those are the things that often stand out when doing comparisons. If there's multiple companies following the bid instructions very clearly and answering the proposal, the evaluation in a very clear way, then it starts to get a little bit difficult to see the differences between different bids. So those areas are ones that I think are quite important areas to focus on.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate that. Now, in terms of from a look and feel perspective, what makes, as an evaluator, what makes proposals stand out over the competition?
Yeah, I mean, in general, it's a lot of the basic things I've mentioned. So that be answering the exam question that's been laid down in the RFP or the RFI documentation. So being absolutely clinical in terms of following the instructions and the formats, etc. Also ensuring that your own proposal is very well written, packaged, and formatted in a way that's very eye-catching and appealing to a reader. There's many occasions where I've seen data sheets and spreadsheets and things just bundled together in a response, and it really takes quite a lot of effort to unpick that as an evaluator, and that automatically puts the bidder in a negative situation. Even if the substantial content is of high value, you're making it very difficult for the evaluator. So that's absolutely essential. Another area that's important is typically on evaluation metrics, which are quite often published with RFPs. There'll typically be a compliance matrix of some sort that needs to be completed. A lot of bidders, I think, leave that to the last minute in their bid submission, and quite often they'll just make a very bland statement like, "Yes, we're compliant," which most evaluators are looking for. Not the fact that you are saying you're compliant, but the examples and the evidence of the compliance. So, the compliance matrix, is a very critical document that needs to be fully completed, and in a lot of cases may actually contain extracts and summaries of critical sections within your full bid proposal. So, it can be quite a painful process to complete properly, but is absolutely essential from an evaluator's point of view, because typically for internal compliance, that document will be heavily relied upon, to ensure that the evaluation process has been done in a fair and objective way. So completion of the compliance matrix is super critical. And the third area, which is also very important, is the executive summary. Quite often you will get people on evaluation team who may be quite senior, but they don't drill into the detail of every facet of the submission, but they would typically, as an absolute minimum, look at the executive summary. So having a first-rate, top-notch, super clear executive summary, is absolutely essential. Which covers off, important evaluators that maybe won't be reading the full submission, but they need to get a good sense of the completeness of the response, and the executive summary will achieve that. And even for people doing the full evaluation, having a good executive summary also sets up a solid introduction to the entire proposal. So from both perspectives, executive summaries is absolutely essential to have a first-rate response in that area. So those are the areas.
Thanks, Tom. That's an interesting one, because people had given us questions as part of the registration. Compliance matrix came up a number of times, and sort of the look and feel. Could you just take a minute about the look and feel? When you get a proposal, do you start with page 1 and go to page 250, or what do you think of that?
That's an interesting one, actually, because I think I've worked on evaluations previously particularly where there's a large tender, and you may have teams focusing on different aspects of the proposal, so they may only zoom in directly to certain chapters or certain sections. And typically, if they're under time pressure, that they may not read the entire proposal from end to end. So they may just look at their area that they're being asked to evaluate, and then typically you'd have other people who would be evaluating the entire proposal. So that's difficult from a bidder's point of view to know exactly how it's going to be approached, and a lot of that may also be subject to time constraints as to how the work is split. But I come back to my point as to why the executive summary is absolutely critical, because people who are evaluating a subset of the response or the full response, inevitably, just out of natural human curiosity, they would read the executive summary. So that's always a good introductory place. But generally, in terms of reading proposals, depending on the degree of complexity, they quite often would require multiple reviews of the submission. I've been working on a large healthcare procurement most of this calendar year, actually, for the first 6 months of this year, and that required literally 4 or 5 reviews of each bidder's proposal, actually. So because of the level of complexity. So coming back to my point, if you haven't followed the instructions, and inherently somebody's going to be reviewing your proposal multiple times, you're going to make their life really, really difficult if you haven't followed the format and the instructions that have been provided. So that's really critical to follow the instructions and have that executive summary from that point of view.
Thanks, Tom. And I guess when you have to make multiple passes on a proposal, and one bidder has put in a compliance matrix that makes navigation easy, and they've put in an exec summary, then that takes the hard work out of it, doesn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely does, and immediately puts evaluators into a comfort position, a feeling of dealing with a company that knows what they're doing, a feeling that you're in safe hands, a feeling of low risk, etc., etc. So that really does stand out, and I think maybe in years gone by, large multinational companies with a well-known brand could get away with putting in a poor submission, but that's more and more difficult these days. I find clients are looking for value for money, and won't necessarily always trade on companies' reputations. They'll evaluate based on the quality of that particular submission for that particular customer situation. So yeah, it's absolutely paramount.
Thanks, Tom. So finally, in this day of electronic submissions, virtual interactions, speed reading, what are some additional tips you can provide bidders, anyone in the audience here?
Yeah, so that's an interesting point you raised. I mean, I think there's some very pragmatic things. One is you need to, where possible, use the jargon and the language that the customer has used in your response. So if they've asked you for a particular feature or a particular facet of the solution they're looking to procure, if your company uses a different vocabulary to the client, you're not always going to get the opportunity to say to them, oh, when we say X, that really means what you say is Y. Because by the time you've submitted your submission, you're not necessarily going to have much opportunity to do that. And quite often, people will literally be using Microsoft Word or a PDF document, searching for known terminology or known terms in documents as a evidence trail that you've covered that particular topic. So if you're using a different terminology to the one the customer has used in the RFP, they may not find the evidence in the document, even though in reality you're covering the requirement. But you may be just articulating it in a different way, and that tends to be quite difficult for bidding organizations, because they prefer to use their own internal jargon in their own language. So that's a very critical point. Particularly for example, this healthcare bid I've mentioned. Some submissions were 300, 400, 500 pages long with a lot of appendices. So if you're having to review that multiple times, you're typically looking for trace compliance in documents, and using a search function on a word processor or a PDF editor is quite a common way of finding things. So if you're making it difficult for the evaluator, then you're likely to be scored down, and you may not always get the opportunity to explain your company's jargon or vocabulary that's used. So that's quite an important area, I would say. Along with what we've already mentioned about following the instructions and the having a clear layout and format, etc.
Thanks, Tom. So a couple of questions there was about the team and in terms of time taking to prepare a bid. Could you expand on that?
Yeah, so in terms of the pre-bids, yes. I mean that obviously from the customer's point of view, that typically should be quite an important activity for them. Though it's quite surprising quite often how things get rushed out the door because of time pressures. But yes, I mean on just to clarify your question, Sam, you're talking about on the client side now, yes, in terms of them. Or the bidder's side? The
bidder's side. Do they put the person available, or who should they put?
Yeah.
What's obvious to you as an evaluator?
Yes, I mean, absolutely. You need to put your best people on the bid. Quite often with multiple activities and multiple sales activities going on at time, that becomes very difficult. But somehow through a peer review process and splitting up the workload appropriately, you need to put the team on the job. Another critical part is ensuring continuity from the reviewing the RFP, compiling the bid, and then the team that you will put in front of the customer to ensure consistency throughout that process, so you don't have any disconnects within your team. Typically there'll be quite a lot of iteration with the customer, and if you change your team members over time, that can also be quite problematic if people don't have a history of the interaction with the client during the process. So yeah, absolutely essential to have your A team in place. And yeah, I think that becomes a little bit more realistic in the current environment with COVID-19 and travel restrictions. Customers are not necessarily quite as demanding as having face-to-face interaction, and that has a sort of slightly positive impact, I think, for a lot of bidding organisations, because there's less travel time involved, and things can be a bit difficult with different time zones. But yeah, that should be a slightly positive, in the current environment, in terms of getting more exposure for your A team across more client interactions.
Thanks, Tom. And Tom, we really appreciate that. There's a lot of people on here. I'd like to call two esteemed guests who are governing board members of APMP India. We welcome Abhilasha Shiva from First Source. Thank you very much for taking the time out and joining us. And also Sanjay Singh from Genpact. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll open the floor up. Anyone wants to ask a question, you could either just raise your hand. And I think somebody has raised their hand. I don't know who it is, but please go ahead and unmute yourself and ask the question.
Hi, Tom. Hi, Sam. Good afternoon. Tom, my question is, as an evaluator, how difficult is it for you to choose over the incumbent? And in your career, how many times have you chosen over the incumbent?
Well, I'll answer your second part first. Quite often, actually, because when you're if you've got a clear evaluation methodology and alignment to the business objectives, then there's really a lot of incumbents underplay their hands on existing business. So yeah, I've never been shy of recommending what's right for the situation. So yeah, I mean that's happened quite a lot. And the first part was about the comparison. Yeah, I mean the comparison is generally quite can be quite difficult. Particularly if you haven't in advance agreed your evaluation criteria and the essential elements of the proposals that you're reviewing. And that's quite a big mistake that's quite often made, particularly on large scale procurements, covering multiple functions within a company. If there's not been a lot of homework beforehand, then you get into a lot of let's say internal discussion about what's more important, what's less important, what are the knockout criteria, what are the nice to haves, etc. So there's a lot of work required beforehand on the customer side to fully align with that sort of thing. So that the worst case is not to have that clear and have a complex set of proposals land on your desk, and then you're in a really difficult situation to evaluate something that's quite complex, but with and without a clear selection criteria. And then you have the added complication then of particularly companies that would be eliminated. How are you going to explain to them that they've been eliminated if if you haven't really had a clear evaluation criteria? So yeah, that's a long answer to your short question, but hopefully I covered it.
Thanks, Tom. And Sanjay has put a question earlier, but Sanjay, do you want to either ask the same question or another question? Go ahead, Sanjay.
No, it's a different question, and this is based on what I heard from Tom earlier when he said that the compliance matrix is a very critical tool. It helps you determine who's meeting the compliances, and therefore if compliance matrix is included, it's helpful. Now, as part of the compliance request, why don't organizations put a line saying, hey, you have to include a compliance matrix as well, in addition to meeting it, like put that as a checklist? Wouldn't that help your job as an evaluator if you put that up in the RFP itself?
Yeah, and typically on well-managed RFPs, that would be part of the process, exactly as you are saying. What I've seen, from my experience is, because I've come into projects at different stages, including coming in to evaluate proposals after the submission date, and then you need to reverse engineer to find out what was not done that should have been done. But as you're in a live situation then, so yeah, as you said, absolutely correct. Having compliance matrix published is helpful to the bidders and to the evaluators. Making it clear that just giving a sort of a bland yes, no, fully compliant, partially compliant type of response, without relevant cross-reference to the submission, or even better, don't cross-reference, actually restate the particular compliance in the compliance matrix. And then if that's a dream for an evaluator, is to go down the evaluation matrix, see the self-assessment effectively on the evaluation, and the actual information that's pertinent to why they're saying they're compliant. I mean, that's a dream for an evaluator like me. So yeah, absolutely. And I mean, as a bidder, yes, sometimes things can be quite difficult because the customer may not have even published a compliance matrix. I mean that's not also uncommon, which then makes things quite difficult, for you as a bidder, if they haven't given, or they may have published one, but it's a little bit wishy-washy, not entirely clear what's going on. But I mean, one thing I would say is if you're a bidder, and particularly if it's a large scale bid, that's going to take up a lot of internal time and resources, you should at least go back to the client and be a little bit pushy to say, look, we need to know what is the compliance here. You haven't published one, but we need to know where we stand. We want to do this professionally. We want to do it in a serious way. We want to make sure we have an even chance of being successful, and to push back a little bit on the client. And obviously you need to be a little bit smart about how you do that to not create a negative environment. But I think it's good to push back a little bit if some of the instructions are not clear as a bidder. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
thanks.
perfect.
Thanks.
Thanks, Tom. I know we've run out of time, but we've just had one question come in from Ravi. So we'll just take one more question before we finish. Ravi, would you like to ask your question?
Sure, Sam. Hi, Tom. Hi. Just a quick question. If you are bringing a subcontractor into the play to provide services to your client, as an evaluator, do you see it as a strength of the organization or a weakness of the service provider in the overall proposal?
Are you talking about on the client side now, or the bidders side, Ravi?
Bidder side.
Yeah. I mean that will depend a little bit on the context. I would say so. A lot of clients will be looking. It's not uncommon. I take my Middle East experience where they're really looking for on the ground resources to deal with certain aspects of of the project, the delivery. So if you don't have that, you may be able to get that through using third party, etc. So you need to weigh up the pros and cons. I think in general, again, it would depend on the scope of if it was a very narrow scope of solution that was being bid, then I guess the client would expect your organization as the bidder to have that expertise. If it was quite a wide range of scope and expertise, I think a lot of customers these days, understand that, there should be specialist expertise in different domains, and and therefore are a little bit more open to a more of a sort of consortium, type of response. But I think in that case, the thing you really need to make clear is that if your company's the one that's the prime bidder, for example, and you've got subcontractors in, that you're taking the full end-to-end overall responsibility for the delivery. So the interaction with any subcontractors would be not a burden to the customer. So you would put that across as a strength of having diverse specialist expertise, but with no risk to the customer. So, but yeah, I think it's very solution or context specific. I've given a range of answers there, Ravi. So, I think you'd need to be, careful, depending on your knowledge of the client's preferences and the way of working. But probably the larger the type of solution, inevitably you're going to have a mix of suppliers and subcontractors involved. And it's just a question of whether you put that across in a way that here's a set of jigsaw pieces, and the risk is with the client. That obviously wouldn't really go down that well. So putting it in a way where the client's getting the best of both worlds, in terms of the depth of expertise, but no risk, would be my general recommendation on how to deal with that.
Thank you very much, Tom.
Thanks.
Thanks, Ravi. And thank you, Tom. We really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule and sharing your insight. It's always a pleasure to see you. And thanks to all the participants, every one of you, or your friends, colleagues, potential colleagues. And it's a real pleasure to have you on this webinar.